Hello everyone, welcome back. So I've got 5 books to talk about today. These are books that I've been reading over the past couple of weeks. I've been in a bit of a slow patch recently, and usually I know which book I'm going to read next. I kind of have a streak where I'll get halfway through a book and I'll know which one I'm going to read next. That hasn't been happening lately. I have very much been reading books and then not knowing which ones to turn to, and I wound up finishing my in-between book, and I didn't really know which one to go on to next. And a couple of these were for Garb August, and I'm just going to get into it. So this is, I think, my 4th or 5th take of this video, and my last one was about 18 minutes long, and I realized that I had been talking about this book for about 15 minutes, and that was just too long because I have all these books to talk about. So the first book is Dark Tales by Shirley Jackson. And this was really good. I really enjoyed this. I read it all in one day. And I didn't intend to, but that's just how it worked out. Some of the stories are better than others, of course. And while I was reading this, I realized that now a lot of people mistakenly, I think mistakenly, put Shirley Jackson into the horror writer category. And I think that is misleading. I think that Shirley Jackson is not so much a horror writer as she is a writer of weird tales. And so, in my take on it, she is closer to Borges and Robert Aickman than she is to any regular horror writer I can think of. And I think, because of The Haunting of Hill House, I think she has been put into the horror category when really, even The Haunting of Hill House is not a horror story, really. It's more of a psychological weird tale where we don't know if the ghosts are real, and it's more to do with the main character's warped perception of reality than it is about ghosts or anything horrific, really. So I took a whole lot of notes while I was reading this book, and the reason the last video ran for so long was because I was reading these notes, and I think I will read a couple of them now, just to, or let me talk about the stories first, and then we'll get to that. So the cover of this book actually does correspond to the first story, and the first story is called The Possibility of Evil, which is about an old woman who lives in a small town, and her forebears had created this town. They had started a factory, and the town built up, and they are responsible for this town. And so even though all of them are dead and the factory has been closed down for quite some time, this lady, and she lives in a big house, but it's kind of old and falling apart. She has this very rigid schedule, an idea of what is proper and right. She believes that she is basically the matriarch of this town, and that everybody is super concerned with what she is up to and with what her ideas of virtue are. And she believes that she has the right to tell other people how to live their lives, only she doesn't do it directly. She writes poison pen letters, even when she knows that what she's writing is untrue. And she writes on this paper of the stationery that she buys at the stationery store, which is different colors, and everybody in town uses it because it is cheap, so they write notes and grocery lists and that sort of thing. And so nobody knows who is writing these letters, but she watches as her letters affect the people in town. And she goes to mail one of these letters, and she drops one on the ground. And one of the neighborhood kids picks it up, who has been affected by her letters, because the lady had been writing about what a man's daughter was up to with this boy. And they have had this, even though nothing's going on with them really, they're just kids, but the father gets mad and threatens to beat the boy up and all sorts of things. And he finds the letter and reads it, and the people are not happy about this. The Honeymoon of Mrs. Smith. That is about a woman who has recently gotten married. She's moved to this small town, and everyone there seems to know who she is, even though she's only been there for a few days. And they are pointing at her and whispering about her. And when she walks into stores, people will stop talking and just look at her. And we are kind of weirded out by this as a reader. The owner of the grocery store is clearly wanting to say something to her. And then she goes to the hardware store, and the hardware store owner says, "Look, that guy you married, he looks just like that guy who's murdering his wives. And we know this because his picture has been in the paper." And she says, "Well, you know, maybe." And it is a strange story of this woman's indifference to being married to this man who may kill her. And there is this is he, isn't he quality to it. And she seems in a way to welcome it and in a way to be completely indifferent to it. And no one in town, even though they know he is the murderer, they will not call the police or say anything because they're willing to gossip about her. They're willing to make suggestions to her, but they're not willing to get involved, right? So nobody wants to intrude on their privacy. No one wants to get involved in this situation or be wrong or anything like that. Very strange story. Let's see. The story we used to tell, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Jack the Ripper. I think Jack the Ripper was the weakest story in this book because it is about a man who finds a drunk girl passed out in an alley, and he goes into this bar and he tries to find people who will help her, and nobody seems to care about her. And so he takes her to her house, and he turns out to be Jack the Ripper. The Beautiful Stranger, all she said was yes. What a Thought, The Bus, Family Treasures, A Visit. So The Bus is about a woman who is kind of irritating, and she thinks very much about what used to be instead of what is, and she has to take the bus to get from one place to another, and she kind of annoys everybody around her because she kind of believes that she is superior to everyone else because she used to live in a large house and this and that. And the bus driver is tired of her, so he dumps her out at a bus stop in the middle of nowhere in the rain. She is picked up by some young toughs, and they take her to a roadhouse, and she is just completely out of her element. But it is in a big house like she grew up in, but it's been gutted, and there are a bunch of people drinking in it, and the owner is a very rude woman, and she rents her a room for the night, and some strange things happen. The Man in the Woods, that is a story, very strange, almost like a mythical retelling of a man who is walking through the woods. A cat joins him. He goes to a house where two women are cooking, and it seems like that's all they've ever done, and they have these conversations that make you think that they are very, very old. And there's a man there, and he turns out to be the man of the woods. And the new guy just might have to take his place. And it reminded me of, I haven't read the entire Golden Bough, but I've read the beginning where it explains that there was a certain religion, and there would be a man who guarded a garden, and the way that he got his job was to kill the old guard of the garden, and the way that he would lose his job and his life was for the new person to come along and kill him and take over the garden. And that is kind of what this story turns into, and that was very strange. Home, The Summer People. The Summer People is a story that's in a lot of anthologies. It's about two older people who decide to stay on at their summer home through the winter, and bit by bit it becomes clear that the locals do not want them there, that they have strayed beyond what is proper. I skipped Louisa, Please Come Home. That's an interesting story about a young woman who decides that she wants to run away from home. She does so very methodically, and she builds her own life over about a year. And then the neighbor boy sees her and drags her back home, and he is just happy because he's going to get the reward. And when they get there, her family doesn't recognize her because this boy has brought these other girls home, and they don't want to recognize her. They are strangers. This whole family of people is strangers, and they are kind of enjoying their misery in this loss of their daughter giving them meaning in their life. And that was an interesting one. And that's, you know, that's what I was saying about these notes and why I wrote so many and why I spent so long talking about them in my last take on this that I have since deleted. But there's a dreamlike quality to Shirley Jackson's writing. There's a shallow, superficial, claustrophobic, arrogant, hypocritical, ignorant, and empty quality to these characters. There's an ambiguousness to these stories, and there's very much the sense that we are all strangers to each other, and we imprison ourselves in these social codes where, even though we hate them, where we hate that the neighbors are talking about us and what will people think about us, we hate this, we are perpetuating this, and we are perpetuating what is proper and what is right, what is considered to be right, even though we know that it is stifling and smothering. And that was a very interesting take. And here's another. Shirley Jackson also kind of reminds me of Flannery O'Connor, but with less focus on religion and more of a dreamlike quality. I could go on and on about these notes, you know, but there's very much that sense of small town gossip and the superiority some people come to feel over others for petty reasons, and the distance that formality creates, that this needless formality creates between people, an unbreachable gap that is used to distance people, and they know that it distances each other, but they keep doing it. So just perpetuating the same thing over and over, and the strangeness of society in general. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I have rambled and perhaps not made very much sense there, but I really like Shirley Jackson's writing, and I want to read more in the future. So after that, I read Their Finest Hour, and this took me several months. I started this in February. This is my in-between book, the book that I read in between other books to keep reading. And so this is Churchill's take on the fall of France and the period when Britain was facing Germany and Germany alone. This is before Japan went to war against Britain and the United States. This covers the Blitz, the destruction of the French fleet by the British after they went to, I believe they went to Iran, and Admiral Darlan refused to take his fleet away from Iran. He refused to go to French-held islands in South America or someplace like that, I believe. And the British were afraid that the French fleet was going to fall into the hands of Vichy and into the hands of the Nazis. And so the British felt that there was no choice but to destroy the French fleet at Iran. And that, as you may imagine, created some pretty bad blood between the French and the British. Things are not quite as clear-cut as they appear in certain histories and certain television shows. Let's see, what else? The Miracle at Dunkirk, or the Miracle of Dunkirk, which is a very interesting thing. Anyway, the Blitz. And this, you know, I'm kind of rambling, but this encompasses Churchill's experience within this as Prime Minister of Great Britain, the letters he sent to Franklin Roosevelt, the conversations he had with the French president, with General de Gaulle, with the generals that were subordinate to him, with Anthony Eden and Neville Chamberlain. And I really enjoyed this. Churchill's writing is it flows. It very much flows. And he dictated his later books, and you can tell it has a very conversational quality to it. And I thought that I would read a chunk of it just to give you an idea of Churchill's writing. After Oran, it became clear to all countries that the British government and nation were resolved to fight on to the last. But even if there were no moral weakness in Britain, how could the appalling physical facts be overcome? Our armies at home were known to be almost unarmed except for rifles. There were, in fact, hardly 500 field guns of any sort, and hardly 200 medium or heavy tanks in the whole country. Months must pass before our factories could make good even the munitions lost at Dunkirk. Can one wonder that the world at large was convinced that our hour of doom had struck? Deep alarm spread through the United States, and indeed through all the surviving free countries. Americans gravely asked themselves whether it was right to cast away any of their own severely limited resources to indulge a generous though helpless sentiment. Ought they not to strain every nerve and nurse every weapon to remedy their own unpreparedness? It needed a very sure judgment to ride above these cogent, matter-of-fact arguments. The gratitude of the British nation is due to the noble President and his great officers and high advisers, for never, even in the event of the third-term presidential election, losing their confidence in our fortune or our will. The buoyant and imperturbable temper of Britain, which I had the honor to express, may well have turned the scale. Here was this people, who in the years before the war had gone to the extreme bounds of pacifism and improvidence, who had indulged in the sport of party politics, and who, though so weakly armed, had advanced light-heartedly into the center of European affairs, now confronted with the reckoning alike of their virtuous impulses and neglectful arrangements. They were not even dismayed. They defied the conquerors of Europe. They seemed willing to have their island reduced to a shambles rather than give in. This would make a fine page in history. But there were other tales of this kind. Athens had been conquered by Sparta. The Carthaginians made a forlorn resistance to Rome. Not seldom in the annals of the past, and how much more often in tragedies never recorded or long forgotten, had brave, proud, easygoing states, and even entire races, been wiped out, so that only their name, or even no mention of them, remains. Few British and very few foreigners understood the peculiar technical advantages of our insular position, nor was it generally known how even in the irresolute years before the war, the essentials of sea and latterly air defense had been maintained. It was nearly 1,000 years since Britain had seen the fires of a foreign camp on English soil. At the summit of British resistance, everyone remained calm, content to set their lives upon the cast. That this was our mood was gradually recognized by friends and foes throughout the whole world. What was there behind the mood? That could only be settled by brute force. So, that is Their Finest Hour by Winston Churchill. This is a very good series. So, seeing as how this video is already running on for quite some time, and I have several more books to talk about here, I'm going to make this one the last book that I talk about in this video, and there will be a part 2. But this is Murder, She Wrote, The Murder of 12 by Jessica Fletcher and John Land. I read this for Garb August. If you'll remember, in my Comfort Reads video, I did a Comfort Reads video about a book called Country New England Inns, 1984 to 85. It's a guide to country inns in New England, as you might imagine. And I got to talking about Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote, and how there's a rabbit hole you can go down where perhaps she is the murderer, or perhaps she is just the writer writing about a character named after herself, or perhaps she is just a regular person who is actually caught up in all these murders and is just extremely unfortunate and unlucky. And there is some mention made in this book about her friends. I can't remember their names, you'll have to forgive me. I'm not super familiar with the show. I've only seen a few episodes with my mom here and there. But the doctor, and his name is Seth, I believe, and the sheriff, the third sheriff, I believe, they are kind of joking around that Jessica Fletcher is the Grim Reaper, and that why would anybody come to Cabot Cove, you know, because it's extremely dangerous here, because people are just known to be killed in Cabot Cove. My mom has this bag, and it's got like a picture of Cabot Cove on it, and it says Cabot Cove, murder capital of the world. and and Jessica Fletcher is always present, so I call her the murder lady. So if you see her coming, run for your life. But this was good. I enjoyed this. It hit just the right spot. And I was talking about the comfort of the Comfort Reads video, The Country New England Ends, because in this book, Jessica Fletcher is living in an inn in Cabot Cove, because in one of the books previous to this, her house had been burnt down and she had almost been killed. And so this is a book that is very much in the Agatha Christie style, where a bunch of people wind up snowed in together in this inn slightly out of town, and the sheriff and the state police, nobody can get to them. They're all on their own, and one by one people start getting murdered. And there are some interesting characters in this one. So the bride and the groom are from these two families who hate each other, and the reason is that the groom's father had been running a Bernie Madoff style Ponzi scheme, stole a lot of money from people, and then he jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge before he could be caught. And a lot of people believe that that was not real, it was faked, and that he is still out there. And one of the people who was screwed over in this Ponzi scheme was the bride's father. He's a very arrogant, egotistical man, very unpleasant, and he is actually suing the groom's family for the money, and he is not happy whatsoever with this setup. And the bride and the groom are missing. Their car is found with the doors open, and they are nowhere to be found. In the very beginning, Jessica Fletcher goes with Seth and the sheriff, and they inspect a body that has been found at an abandoned textile mill. And he turns out to be a private investigator, but why he's in town and who hired him are unknown. And Jessica realizes that it looks like he has just sat there to stay warm in his car, but he was actually tied down and he was killed by carbon monoxide poisoning. And so, snowed in with this inn, the owner of the inn is a former Irish policeman who says that he was a traffic cop, but he has more knowledge than a traffic cop would. And so Jessica thinks that he probably was a detective or something like that, and he just doesn't want to talk about it. But they team up. So that is very common in detective stories. You'll have like a Sherlock and a Watson, or you'll have a Poirot and his friend, or another detective. In this case, it's Jessica Fletcher and the owner of Hill House, and they are trying to figure out who the murderer among these 12 people is. And everyone is a suspect, and everyone is a potential victim. And I will say that I didn't think some aspects of this book were done very well. There's a scene where a member of the bride's family, who is like the black sheep, and even though he's a rich kid, he's also a thief, and he likes to party and do drugs and things. He has a pass key and gets into Jessica's room, and she sort of flips out. But we are told this in a very weird way, so that at first it just looks like he has entered the wrong room by mistake, but it gradually comes to be known, or Jessica gradually explains to us why she was panicked, which really didn't fit. I mean, it should have been the other way around. It should have been panicking to us, the reader, and it shouldn't have had to have been a panicking situation in hindsight, because the tension on that was all weird. To the reader, it just looks like the guy got the wrong room, and I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong room. That could have been done better. And I also didn't care for the resolution of this book very much. I felt like the villain was kind of picked out of a hat, kind of done for a shock value, and I didn't feel like the villain made sense. So there are actually multiple villains in this book, but the main person who was doing this didn't make a lot of sense to me, and it just didn't work for me. But it was a very cozy read. It was a very good read. I unfortunately haven't seen the show very much, so I can't say how closely Jessica Fletcher and Seth and the sheriff fit their on-screen characters. So another thing that was kind of jarring about this is that this is set in contemporary times. So Jessica has a smartphone. She knows how to FaceTime. She's Googling things. She's texting. That was really weird to me because I was expecting this to be set in the 80s. And I didn't expect that at all. At first, I really didn't like it. But I got used to it, and I think that aspect of it, I think, was done pretty well. I think she was spending too much time maybe on the phone with a private eye friend in New York. I can't remember what he was called in the show. He had a spinoff for a little while, and the actor was one of the original detectives from Law and Order. Very distinctive. He was also in an episode of Tales from the Dark Side where a couple of divorced guys, as a joke, bring a store mannequin home, and the mannequin comes to life and wreaks havoc in their lives, which is really good. I love Tales from the Dark Side. If you've never seen it, it's worth watching. A very interesting show. Very surreal at times. Some of them are better than others, and some of them haven't aged particularly well because some of them have to do with like technology in the 80s. I could probably do a whole video about Tales from the Dark Side, actually. That is one of my favorite shows. But anyway, this was Murder, She Wrote, the Murder of 12. Really cozy kind of setting because it's in a New England inn. That's cozy to begin with. It's in the middle of a blizzard, and so you're stuck in this spot, and it's a very classic setup. And I did enjoy this book. There were things I didn't like about it, but I did enjoy reading this, and it just hit the spot. I was in the slow period, and I needed something entertaining and not too difficult and kind of comfortable to read, and this was it. And so that is all I'm going to do in this particular part of the video, and I will talk about these other books in another video. So I want to thank you for joining me, and I hope that I didn't ramble too much, particularly about the Shirley Jackson collection. I feel like maybe I got a little unhinged there. But if you have any questions, just ask me any questions, and I'll be happy to reply to them. And that goes for any of my videos. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask me anything, really. But anyway, I want to thank you very much for being here, for joining me for this video, and I'll see you next time.